Is there such a thing as too much research in a research project? Is there a moment when you have to stop researching and focus on the completion of your own paper or dissertation? So, can reading other people's research get in the way of your own research? And this seems a little bit counterintuitive because, after all, you're supposed to read what others have written and get a solid grasp of former research, right? You need to read what has been said before about your topic. This seems very obvious. And also, one of the common points of criticism directed at younger researchers is that they haven't read an important book that is actually very relevant to their own paper or dissertation. All this is, of course, entirely true. You need to read everything what's been written about your topic. And not just read it superficially, but digest it well so you know how it relates to that topic, how the arguments there support your own argument, or maybe how you can supersede them or counter them because they're no longer valid. But the point of this video is that sometimes the desire to be truly comprehensive when doing a literature review or just trying to understand what has been written about this subject gets in the way of your own research. This is especially common with PhD dissertation, the writing of which can drag on for years, because there's always something that needs to be read or incorporated. Something always turns up, and also the professors and scholars you meet at conferences will always give you one or two more books to read because they think that they are quite relevant for your project. And sure, all this is useful up to a point, because I would argue that there comes a point in your research when you have to stop reading what other people have written, when you should stop looking for new leads or even tracking down existing ones, and instead you should focus on your own project and get it done. Because beyond a certain point, research is just another form of procrastination. You're trying to find ways not to do what you don't really want to do. You're trying to avoid doing the big task that may seem too big to tackle or which you don't really know how to tackle. Procrastination is when you postpone things you're supposed to do. Like every year you decide that you're not going to leave your taxes to the very last moment, but will do them a couple of months in advance when you still have time and can track down some of those receipts. But then as the months go on, there is never really a suitable chunk of time to do this, and before you notice, it's the end of the tax year and you're doing your taxes in the very last hour, just like you did them the year before. Or you may decide you want to prepare for your exams in advance and not to do this in the last minute as you normally tend to do. But time flies and then you end up studying the night before the exam. When writing, especially at home, people always find important things to do. Clean the dishes, do laundry, vacuum the floor, water the flowers, respond to urgent emails, walk the dog, run to the post office, or just browse social media. Many of these things are important, even essential, and we do need to do them. But they often are things we default to when we're trying to push off writing just for another half an hour. And to be true, these activities justify themselves so effortlessly. When a friend calls that she has a breakdown, we're all too eager to jump into the car and drive over to her place. Because that's what friends do, right? They help friends in need. Or when the toilet breaks, we spend half an hour, perhaps even 3 hours, trying to find the right plumber for the job. Somebody who's reliable, but also reasonable in terms of the prices. And this is not an easy thing to do, especially not in the countries I've lived in. But in any case, this is really an emergency that needs to be taken care of, and so on. But what's interesting is that you do not procrastinate to go to your favorite cafe or restaurant or watch a Netflix movie. So these are things that, even though you don't have to do them, you still find time to do them. And that actually suggests that maybe you're less busy than how you think of yourself. Researchers who study procrastination say that this is a form of fear, most commonly triggered by not knowing how to handle something, or when the task we need to do is too big and we do not have an overall grasp and don't understand how to deal with it. It is not laziness because we're actually doing something to postpone doing something else. We trade an activity we don't understand for an activity we're familiar with or even good at and so can easily handle, and which of course also needs to get done. But everyone agrees that the way to get out of this is to get more familiar with the task that you need to do. You need to learn how to do it. And for that, probably the best way is to start doing it. And maybe suck at it for a while, but then gradually improve. In any case, this is exactly what happens when after a very long time of working on a paper or a dissertation, we're still trying to track down forgotten articles in obscure journals. And we stop working for a week until a new book arrives from France or until Interlibrary Loan delivers a rare edition of a journal from Gdansk in Poland. We feel that we cannot finalize our research without having read that book or article. And so we wait for just another week, and then another one, and so on. This is simply a form of procrastination. We do not want to engage with writing, and are convincing ourselves that there are other useful things we need to do before we actually write. Or maybe we've been already writing, but the whole thing just doesn't fit together. We don't really know how to shape that final chapter or how to frame the whole thing in a way that makes sense. And all along, we want to write something really good. So there might even be external pressure on us to do so. Since everybody around us seems to be so good at this, writing great stuff, publishing one brilliant paper after another. So with all this pressure, we don't really know how to proceed or how to even start. And so this is the point where too much research happens. Because it is undeniable that research is essential when writing a research paper or a dissertation. That's why we call it a research paper. You are writing up the results of your research in the form of an academic paper, which is going to be your contribution within a particular area of research. So to write anything, you need to do research. You need to know what your field thinks of your topic, or rather, how they have been seeing it until now. Some people even talk about these research papers as simply the output of your findings, a projection of what you uncovered, a written version of your knowledge. I'm not entirely sure how this happens in the sciences, where sometimes the discoveries are really discoveries of something new, something that was not known before. But in the humanities, it is much less so. Because in the humanities, your discoveries do not amount to much without having been written up in the proper way. To put it another way, your discoveries are often just new ways of thinking through the same data. A humanities research paper is a specific genre of writing with its own conventions and expectations. And you need to follow those if you want to get a degree or be published in a research journal. And how good your paper is only partially determined by what you discovered, because it's equally important to formulate this in a way that makes it interesting for the field. You have to alert your peers to the fact that this paper is actually important. It has something to contribute to current research. So I would argue that writing an academic paper, especially in the humanities, is not just typing up your research, because it requires a significant amount of work that is different and goes well beyond reading other people's papers. Writing is altogether a different kind of cognitive activity. For one, this is an active engagement with the material as opposed to the relatively passive process of reading. Of course, you could argue that reading can also be active, because you could be highlighting things, making notes next to statements that spiked your interest or reminded you of something. Which is all true, so I'm not going to argue that reading cannot be active. And it is this kind of reading that is the most useful one, of course, because you remember more and it also stimulates you and gives you new ideas. It makes you think about the concepts you read about, and it sometimes makes you rethink some of the assumptions you've had earlier. But when you're making notes and adding various marks on the margins, you are, in a sense, already writing. Well, technically, you are by definition writing when you're writing something, even if it's only on the margins. But then there are also times when you just read. You read a book that is tangentially related to your own topic, and you often do not really stop to make notes or just make a few ones along the way, or maybe you write up a tiny summary after you finish the whole book. You could also be rereading articles you have read before, but which now seem to be even more relevant to the points you've been thinking about. So all this is research. But in a practical sense, research is even more. It's a very complex activity and includes a range of different things that you do, because it involves going to the library and spending your mornings there, going through materials that cannot be borrowed, or through a series of massive volumes you don't really want to take home. You might be simply enjoying your quiet spot and the general atmosphere of studying around you, because that seems to allow you to concentrate for 2-3 hours at a time. But research also involves getting books and photocopying articles, requesting them at the service desk or through the library website, recalling them if they're loaned out, which is always weird because you wonder who else in the university would be needing the same book on Chinese medieval spells, especially if it is written in Japanese. Some things you may need to get through interlibrary loan, which means that you need to fill out forms and locate the library which carries the book. And for this, you might need to interact with library staff who may be away from their desk for just a few minutes or have gone to lunch but should be back shortly. And these visits to the library also result in you hanging out in the library's cafe or tea room and getting just the kind of scone and coffee that you like, and then maybe talking to somebody for half an hour or even an hour. And sure, you're talking about your research project, but then you also talk about some of the other stuff that's happening to you. The horrible prospects of getting a job, having to adjust your visa status, or needing to find new accommodation. So if we want to be realistic, this is all kind of part of the time that you allocate for research. Everything we just talked about takes time, and almost none of this time is spent on you typing words into your computer. Some of these activities may even be called active. After all, requesting a book from storage is not a passive activity, and neither is photocopying a dozen articles you ordered through interlibrary loan, or spending 40 minutes in the stacks trying to find a book on medieval sericulture you remember having seen there 3 years earlier. Doing these things, you're doing something concrete towards your goal. But that something is surely not writing. None of these things increases the word count of your paper. Basically, you're just enabling yourself to consume more formal research done by other people. But there comes a point when you need to start writing yourself. You need to put down words on the page and formulate your thoughts into the structure of an academic paper. You need to increase your word count and move from 2,000 words to 10,000 or higher, depending on the requirements towards you. And this is a progression that can only happen if you're actively involved in this process by practicing and spending time on it. And of course, it is completely understandable if you're not good at this at the beginning. What is important is to keep improving and begin understanding the rules of the game and learn the techniques and tricks which more experienced writers already know. Okay, so these are my thoughts on how research can be a form of procrastination. And most of this derives from me having experienced similar things or having talked to graduate students who are also struggling with writing. And I've seen that writing a paper, and especially finishing a dissertation, can take a very long time. And there might be many legitimate reasons for this, but this kind of procrastination is also part of the picture. So let me know your experience with this, or maybe some of the solutions that you came up with. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.